Kayaks were originally developed by the Inuit, Yupik, and Aleut. They used the boats to hunt on inland lakes, rivers and coastal waters of the Arctic Ocean, North Atlantic, Bering Sea and North Pacific Oceans. These first kayaks were constructed from stitched seal or other animal skins stretched over a wood or whalebone skeleton frame. Western Alaskan natives used wood, whereas the eastern Inuit used whalebone due to the treeless landscape. Kayaks are believed to be at least 4,000 years old. The oldest kayaks remaining are exhibited in the North America Department of the State Museum of Ethnology in Munich, with the oldest dating from 1577. Subarctic people made many types of boats for different purposes. The Aleut Badarka was made in double or triple cockpit designs, for hunting and transporting passengers or goods. An umiak is a large open-sea canoe, ranging from 5.2 to 9.1 meters, made with seal skins and wood. It is considered a kayak although it was originally paddled with single-bladed paddles, and typically had more than one paddler. Subarctic builders designed and built their boats based on their own experience and that of the generations before them, passed on through oral tradition. The word, kayak, means, man's boat, or, hunter's boat, and subarctic kayaks were a personal craft, each built by the man who used it, with assistance from his wife, and closely fitting his size for maximum maneuverability. The paddler wore a tilak, a garment that was stretched over the rim of the kayak coaming and sealed with drawstrings at the coaming, wrists, and hood edges. This enabled the Eskimo roll and rescue to become the preferred methods of recovery after capsizing, especially as few Inuit could swim. Their waters are too cold for a swimmer to survive for long. Instead of a tilak, most traditional kayakers today use a spray deck made of waterproof synthetic material stretchy enough to fit tightly around the cockpit rim and body of the kayaker, and which can be released rapidly from the cockpit to permit easy exit, in particular in a wet exit after a capsizing. Inuit kayak builders had specific measurements for their boats. The length was typically 3 times the span of his outstretched arms. The width at the cockpit was the width of the builder's hips plus 2 fists, sometimes less. The typical depth was his fist plus the outstretched thumb, hitchhiker. Thus typical dimensions were about 5.2 meters long by 51 to 56 centimeters wide by 18 centimeters deep. Traditional kayaks encompass 3 types. Badarkas, from the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, the oldest design, whose rounded shape and numerous chines give them an almost blimp-like appearance. West Greenland kayaks, with fewer chines and a more angular shape, with gunnels rising to a point at the bow and stern. And East Greenland kayaks that appear similar to the West Greenland style, but often fit more snugly to the paddler and possess a steeper angle between gunnel and stem, which lends maneuverability. Most of the Aleut people in the Aleutian Islands eastward to Greenland Inuit relied on the kayak for hunting a variety of prey, primarily seals, though whales and caribou were important in some areas. A kayak is a small, narrow watercraft which is typically propelled by means of a double-bladed paddle. The word kayak originates from the Greenlandic word kajak. The traditional kayak has a covered deck and 1 or more cockpits, each seating 1 paddler. The cockpit is sometimes covered by a spray deck that prevents the entry of water from waves or spray, differentiating the craft from a canoe. The spray deck makes it possible for suitably skilled kayakers to roll the kayak. That is, to capsize and right it without it filling with water or ejecting the paddler. Some modern boats vary considerably from a traditional design but still claim the title kayak, for instance in eliminating the cockpit by seating the paddler on top of the boat, sit on top. Kayaks, having inflated air chambers surrounding the boat, replacing the single hull with twin hulls, and replacing paddles with other human-powered propulsion methods, such as foot-powered rotational propellers and flippers. Kayaks are also being sailed, as well as propelled by means of small electric motors, and even by outboard gasoline engines. The kayak was first used by the indigenous Aleut, Inuit, Yupik and possibly Ainu hunters in subarctic regions of the world. Contemporary traditional-style kayaks trace their origins primarily to the native boats of Alaska, northern Canada, and southwest Greenland. The use of fabric kayaks on wooden frames called a foldboat or folding kayak, German Faltboot or Hardernkahn, became widely popular in Europe beginning in 1907 when they were mass-produced by Johannes Klepper and others. This type of kayak was introduced to England and Europe by John MacGregor, sportsman, in 1860, but Klepper was the first person to mass-produce these boats made of collapsible wooden frames covered by waterproof rubberized canvas. By 1929, Klepper and Company were making 90 foldboats a day. Joined by other European manufacturers, by the mid-1930s there were an estimated 500,000 foldboat kayaks in use throughout Europe. First Nation masters of the role taught this technique to Europeans during this time period. These boats were tough and intrepid individuals were soon doing amazing things in them. In June 1928, a German named Franz Romer Sea Kayak rigged his 6.1 meters long foldboat with a sail and departed from Las Palmas in the Canary Islands carrying 270 kilograms of tinned food and 210 liters of water. 58 days and 5,060 kilometers later he reached St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands. Another German, Oskar Speck, paddled his foldboat down the Danube and 4 years later reached the Australian coast after having traveled roughly 14,000 miles across the Pacific. These watercraft were brought to the United States and used competitively in 1940 at the first National Whitewater Championship held in America near Middledam, Maine, on the Rapid River, Maine. 1. Winner. Royal Little, crossed the finish line clinging to his overturned foldboat. Upstream, the river was strewn with many badly buffeted and some wrecked boats. 2 women were in the competition, Amy Lang and Marjorie Hurd. With her partner Ken Hutchinson, Hurd won the double canoe race. Lang won the doubles foldboat event with her partner, Alexander Z. Grant. In the late 1930s and early 1940s, Alexander Z. Grant was most likely America's best foldboat pilot. Grant kayaked the Gates of Lodore on the Green River, Colorado River tributary, in Dinosaur National Monument in 1939 and the Middle Fork Salmon River in 1940. In 1941, Grant paddled a foldboat through Grand Canyon National Park. He outfitted his foldboat, named Escalante, with a sponson on each side of his boat and filled the boat with beach balls. As with nearly all American foldboat enthusiasts of the day, he did not know how to roll his boat. Fiberglass mixed with resin composites, invented in the 1930s and 1940s, were soon used to make kayaks, and this type of watercraft saw increased use during the 1950s, including in the U.S. Kayak slalom world champion Walter Kirschbaum built a fiberglass kayak and paddled it through Grand Canyon in June 1960. He knew how to roll and only swam once. Enhance Rapid, see List of Colorado River rapids and features. Like Grant's foldboat, Kirschbaum's fiberglass kayak had no seat and no thigh braces. In June 1987, Ed Gillett, using a stock off-the-shelf traditional design 20-foot long by 31-inch wide fiberglass tandem kayak paddled over 2,000 miles non-stop from Monterey, California to Hawaii, landing his vessel there on August 27, 1987, after 64 days of paddling. Gillett had navigated his kayak by using a traditional sextant and compass, along with approximately 600 pounds of food and water, including a device to convert seawater to fresh water. Within 6 days of reaching Hawaii, both he and his yellow kayak were featured on The Tonight Show, hosted by Johnny Carson. Inflatable rubberized fabric boats were first introduced in Europe, and rotomolded plastic kayaks first appeared in 1973. Most kayaks today are made from roto-molded polyethylene resins. The development of plastic and rubberized inflatable kayaks arguably initiated the development of freestyle kayaking as we see it today, since these boats could be made smaller, stronger, and more resilient than fiberglass boats. Typically, kayak design is largely a matter of trade-offs. Directional stability, tracking, versus maneuverability, stability versus speed, and primary versus secondary stability. Multi-hull kayaks face a different set of trade-offs. The paddler's body shape and size is an integral part of the structure, and will also affect the trade-offs made. Attempting to lift and carry a kayak by oneself or improperly is a significant cause of kayaking injuries. Good lifting technique, sharing loads, and not using needlessly large and heavy kayaks prevents injuries. If the displacement of a kayak is not enough to support the passengers and gear, it will sink. If the displacement is excessive, the kayak will float too high, catch the wind and waves uncomfortably, and handle poorly. It will probably also be bigger and heavier than it needs to be. Being excessively big will create more drag, and the kayak will move more slowly and take more effort. Rolling is easier in lower displacement kayaks. On the other hand, a higher deck will keep the paddlers drier and make self-rescue and coming through surf easier. Many beginning paddlers who use a sit-in kayak feel more secure in a kayak with a weight capacity substantially more than their own weight. Maximum volume in a sit-in kayak is helped by a wide hull with high sides. But paddling ease is helped by lower sides where the paddler sits in a narrower width. While the kayak's buoyancy must be more than the loaded kayak, the optimal amount of excess buoyancy varies somewhat with kayak type, purpose, and personal taste. Squirt boats, for instance, have very little positive buoyancy. Displacements obviously must also vary greatly with paddler weight. Most manufacturers make kayaks for paddlers weighing 65 to 85 kilograms, with some kayaks for paddlers down to 50 kilograms. Kayaks made for paddlers under 45 kilograms are almost all very beamy and intended for beginners. About 20% of the US population are not in this 65 to 85 kilograms weight range. Either they are too heavy, and will sink almost all commercial kayaks, or they are too light and small to paddle the smallest ones without difficulty. In the United States, those who are too heavy are fairly equally split between men and women, while those too light include many women, most pre-teens, and some teens, but less than 1% of men. Paddling an oversized kayak can be extremely tiring, especially if it is square with a flat bottom. Oversized kayaks for children mean that they are likely to need to be towed towards the end of a paddle. Some commercial kayaks are made to fit small adults and children, and a few are built narrower, to fit women. The overall width of a kayak's cross-section is its beam. A wide hull is more stable and packs more displacement into a shorter length. A narrow hull has less drag and is generally easier to paddle. In waves, it will ride more easily and stay drier. A narrower kayak makes a somewhat shorter paddle appropriate, and a shorter paddle puts less strain on the shoulder joints. Some paddlers are comfortable with a sit-in kayak so narrow that their legs extend fairly straight out. Others want sufficient width to permit crossing their legs inside the kayak. Primary, sometimes called initial, stability describes how much a boat tips, or rocks back and forth when displaced from level by paddler weight shifts. Secondary stability describes how stable a kayak feels when put on edge or when waves are passing under the hull perpendicular to the length of the boat. For kayak rolling, tertiary stability, or the stability of an upside-down kayak, is also important. Lower tertiary stability makes rolling up easier. Primary stability is often a big concern to a beginner, while secondary stability matters both to beginners and experienced travelers. By example, a wide, flat-bottomed kayak will have high primary stability and feel very stable on flat water. However, when a steep wave breaks on such a boat, it can be easily overturned because the flat bottom is no longer level. By contrast, a kayak with a narrower, more rounded hull with more hull flare can be edged or leaned into waves and, in the hands of a skilled kayaker, provides a safer, more comfortable response on stormy seas. Kayaks with only moderate primary, but excellent secondary stability are, in general, considered more seaworthy, especially in challenging conditions. The shape of the cross-section affects stability, maneuverability, and drag. Hull shapes are categorized by roundness, flatness, and by the presence and angle of chines. This cross-section may vary along the length of the boat. A chine typically increases secondary stability by effectively widening the beam of the boat when it heels tips. A V-shaped hull tends to travel straight, track well but makes turning harder. V-shaped hulls also have the greatest secondary stability. Conversely, flat-bottomed hulls are easy to turn, but harder to direct in a constant direction. A round-bottomed boat has minimal area in contact with the water, and thus minimizes drag. However, it may be so unstable that it will not remain upright when floating empty, and needs continual effort to keep it upright. In a skin-on-frame kayak, chine placement may be constrained by the need to avoid the bones of the pelvis. The body of the paddler must also be taken into account. A paddler with a low center of gravity (cog) will find all boats more stable. For a paddler with a high center of gravity, all boats will feel tippier. On average, women have a lower cog than men. Women generally may fit a kayak about 10% narrower than the kayak that would fit a similarly sized man. Commercial kayaks made for women are rare. Unisex kayaks are built for men. Younger children have proportionately smaller and lighter bodies, but near adult size heads, and thus a higher center of gravity. A paddler with narrow shoulders will also want a narrower kayak. Newcomers will often want a craft with high primary stability. The southern method is a wider kayak. The West Greenland method is a removable pair of outriggers, lashed across the stern deck. Such an outrigger pair is often homemade of a small plank and found floats such as empty bottles or plastic ducks. Outriggers are also made commercially, especially for fishing kayaks and sailing. If the floats are set so that they are both in the water, they give primary stability, but produce more drag. If they are set so that they are both out of the water when the kayak is balanced, they give secondary stability. Traditional style and some modern types of kayaks, e.g. sit on top, require that paddler be seated with their legs stretched in front of them, in a right angle, in a position called the L kayaking position. Other kayaks offer a different sitting position, in which the paddler's legs are not stretched out in front of them, and the thigh brace bears more on the inside than the top of the thighs. A kayaker must be able to move the hull of their kayak by moving their lower body, and brace themselves against the hull, mostly with the feet, on each stroke. Most kayaks therefore have footrests and a backrest. Some kayaks fit snugly on the hips, others rely more on thigh braces. Mass-produced kayaks generally have adjustable bracing points. Many paddlers also customize their kayaks by putting in shims of closed-cell foam, or more elaborate structures, to make it fit more tightly. Paddling puts substantial force through the legs, alternately with each stroke. The knees should therefore not be hyperextended. Separately, if the kneecap is in contact with the boat, or the knee joint is in torsion, this will cause pain and may injure the knee. Insufficient foot space will cause painful cramping and inefficient paddling. The paddler should generally be in a comfortable position. Today almost all kayaks are commercial products intended for sale rather than for the builder's personal use. Fiberglass hulls are stiffer than polyethylene hulls, but they are more prone to damage from impact, including cracking. Most modern kayaks have steep V sections at the bow and stern, and a shallow V amidships. Fiberglass kayaks may be laid up in a mold by hand, in which case they are usually more expensive than polyethylene kayaks, which are rotationally molded in a machine. The deck and hull are often made separately and then joined at a horizontal seam. Plastic kayaks are rotationally molded, rotomolded, from a various grades and types of polyethylene resins ranging from soft to hard. Such kayaks are seamless and particularly resistant to impact, but heavy. Inflatable kayaks are increasingly popular due to their ease of storage and transport, as well as the ability to be deflated for extended portage. Although slower than hardshell kayaks, many higher-end models often constructed of hypalon, as opposed to cheaper PVC designs, begin to approach the performance of traditional sea kayaks. Being inflatable, they are virtually unsinkable and often more stable than hardshell designs. New drop stitch technology means slab, rather than tube shapes are used in the designs with higher inflation pressures, leading to considerably faster, though often less stable kayaks which rival hardshell boats in performance. Solid wooden hulls don't necessarily require significant skill and handiwork, depending on how they are made. Three main types are popular, especially for the home builder: plywood stitch and glue (S&G), strip built, and hybrids which have a stitch and glue hull and a strip built deck. Kayaks made from wood sheathed in fiberglass have proven successful, especially as the price of epoxy resin has decreased in recent years. Stitch and glue designs typically use modern, marine-grade plywood with a thickness of about 3 to 5 millimeters. After cutting out the required pieces of hull and deck, kits often have these pre-cut. A series of small holes are drilled along the edges. Copper wire is then used to stitch the pieces together through the holes. After the pieces are temporarily stitched together, they are glued with epoxy and the seams reinforced with fiberglass. When the epoxy dries, the copper stitches are removed. Sometimes the entire boat is then covered in fiberglass for additional strength and waterproofing, though this adds greatly to the weight and is unnecessary. Construction is fairly straightforward, but because plywood does not bend to form compound curves, design choices are limited. This is a good choice for the first-time kayak builder, as the labor and skills required, especially for kit versions, is considerably less than for strip-built boats, which can take 3 times as long to build. Strip-built designs are similar in shape to rigid fiberglass kayaks but are generally both lighter and tougher. Like their fiberglass counterparts, the shape and size of the boat determines performance and optimal uses. The hull and deck are built with thin strips of lightweight wood, often thuja, western red cedar, pine or redwood. The strips are edge glued together around a form, stapled or clamped in place, and allowed to dry. Structural strength comes from a layer of fiberglass cloth and epoxy resin, layered inside and outside the hull. Strip-built kayaks are sold commercially by a few companies, priced $4,000 United States dollars and up. An experienced woodworker can build one for about $400 in 200 hours, though the exact cost and time depend on the builder's skill, the materials, and the size and design. As a second kayak project, or for the serious builder with some woodworking expertise, a strip-built boat can be an impressive piece of work. Kits with pre-cut and milled wood strips are commercially available. Skin-on-frame (SOF) boats are often more traditional in design, materials, and construction. They were traditionally made with driftwood frames, jointed, pegged, and lashed together, and covered with stretched seal skin, as those were the most readily available materials in the Arctic regions. Other skins and baleen framing members were also used at need. A poor man's kayak might be frameless and stuffed with a snow frame. Today, seal skin is usually replaced with canvas or nylon cloth covered with paint, polyurethane, or a hypalon rubber coating, on a wooden or aluminum frame. Modern skin-on-frame kayaks often possess greater impact resistance than their fiberglass counterparts, but are less durable against abrasion or sharp objects. They are often the lightest kayaks. Like the older skin-on-frame kayaks, they are often home-built to fit a specific paddler. Engineer Zyla Foxline built a kayak out of transparent fiberglass as well as leads to create a floating vessel that lights up at night, which she calls the rainboat. A special type of skin-on-frame kayak is the folding kayak. It has a collapsible frame, of wood, aluminum or plastic, or a combination thereof, and a skin of water-resistant and durable fabric. Many types have air sponsons built into the hull, making the kayak float even if flooded. Most modern kayaks differ greatly from the original traditional subarctic kayaks in design, manufacturing and usage. They are often designed with computer-aided design (CAD) software, often in combination with CAD customized for naval design. Modern kayaks serve diverse purposes, ranging from slow and easy touring on placid water, to racing and complex maneuvering in fast-moving whitewater, to fishing and long-distance ocean excursions. Modern forms, materials and construction techniques make it possible to effectively serve these needs while continuing to leverage the insights of the original Arctic inventors. Sea kayaks are typically designed for travel by 1, 2 or even 3 paddlers on open water and in many cases trade maneuverability for seaworthiness, stability, and cargo capacity. Sea kayak subtypes include skin-on-frame, kayaks with traditionally constructed frames, open deck, sit-on-top kayaks, and recreational kayaks. The sea kayak, though descended directly from traditional types, is implemented in a variety of materials. Sea kayaks typically have a longer waterline, and provisions for below-deck storage of cargo. Sea kayaks may also have rudders or skegs, fixed rudder, and upturned bow or stern profiles for wave shedding. Modern sea kayaks usually have 2 or more internal bulkheads. Some models can accommodate 2 or sometimes 3 paddlers. Sealed hull, unsinkable craft were developed for leisure use, as derivatives of surfboards, e.g. paddle or wave skis, or for surf conditions. Variants include planing surf craft, touring kayaks, and sea marathon kayaks. Increasingly, manufacturers build leisure, sit-on-top variants of extreme sports craft, typically using polyethylene to ensure strength and affordability, often with a skeg for directional stability. Sit-on-top kayaks come in 1 to 4 paddler configurations. Sit-on-top kayaks are particularly popular for fishing and scuba diving, since participants need to easily enter and exit the water, change seating positions, and access hatches and storage wells. Ordinarily, the seat of a sit-on-top is slightly above water level, so the center of gravity for the paddler is higher than in a traditional kayak. To compensate for the higher center of gravity, sit-on-tops are often wider and slower than a traditional kayak of the same length. Water that enters the cockpit of a sit-on-top kayak drains out through scupper holes, tubes that run from the cockpit to the bottom of the hull. The cockpit is thus self-bailing. The hull may be sealed, or perforated by hatches and deck fixtures. Contrary to popular belief, the sit-on-top kayak hull is not self-bailing, since water penetrating it does not drain out automatically, as it does in bigger boats equipped with self-bailing systems. Furthermore, the sit-on-top hull cannot be molded in a way that would assure water tightness, and water may get in through various holes in its hull, usually around hatches and deck accessories. If the sit-on-top kayak is loaded to a point where such perforations are covered with water, or if the water paddled is rough enough that such perforations often go underwater, the sit-on-top hull may fill with water without the paddler noticing it in time. If a sealed hull develops a split or hole, it will also fill and sink. Specialty surf boats typically have flat bottoms and hard edges, similar to surf boards. The design of a surf kayak promotes the use of an ocean surf moving wave, as opposed to a river or feature wave moving water. They are typically made from rotomolded plastic or fiberglass. Surf kayaking comes in two main varieties: high performance HP and international class IC. High performance boats tend to have a lot of nose rocker, little to no tail rocker, flat hulls, sharp rails, and up to 4 fins set up as either a 3-fin thruster or a quad fin. This enables them to move at high speed and maneuver dynamically. International class boats have to be at least 3 meters long, and until a recent rule change had to have a convex hull. Now flat and slightly concave hulls are also allowed, although fins are not. Surfing on international boats tends to be smoother and more flowing, and they are thought of as kayaking's longboarding. Surf boats come in a variety of materials ranging from tough but heavy plastics to super light, super stiff but fragile foam cord carbon fiber. Surf kayaking has become popular in traditional surfing locations, as well as new locations such as the Great Lakes. A variation on the closed cockpit surf kayak is called a waveski. Although the waveski offers dynamics similar to a sit on top, its paddling technique and surfing performance and construction can be similar to surfboard designs. The other primary type is the creek boat, which gets its name from its purpose: running narrow, low-volume waterways. Creek boats are longer and have far more volume than playboats, which makes them more stable, faster, and higher floating. Many paddlers use creek boats in short boat, downriver races, and they are often seen on large rivers where their extra stability and speed may be necessary to get through rapids. Between the creekboat and playboat extremes is a category called river running kayaks. These medium-sized boats are designed for rivers of moderate to high volume, and some, known as river running playboats, are capable of basic playboating moves. They are typically owned by paddlers who do not have enough whitewater involvement to warrant the purchase of more specialized boats. Squirt boating involves paddling both on the surface of the river and underwater. Squirt boats must be custom fitted to the paddler to ensure comfort while maintaining the low interior volume necessary to allow the paddler to submerge completely in the river. Whitewater racers combine a fast, unstable lower hull portion with a flared upper hull portion to combine flat water racing speed with extra stability in open water. They are not fitted with rudders and have similar maneuverability to flat water racers. They usually require substantial skill to achieve stability, due to extremely narrow hulls. Whitewater racing kayaks, like all racing kayaks, are made to regulation lengths, usually of fiber-reinforced resin, usually epoxy or polyester reinforced with Kevlar, glass fiber, carbon fiber, or some combination. This form of construction is stiffer and has a harder skin than non-reinforced plastic construction such as rotomolded polyethylene. Stiffer means faster, and harder means fewer scratches and therefore also faster. Sprint kayak is a sport held on calm water. Crews or individuals race over 200 meters, 500 meters, 1,000 meters or 5,000 meters, with the winning boat being the first to cross the finish line. The paddler is seated, facing forward, and uses a double-bladed paddle pulling the blade through the water on alternate sides to propel the boat forward. In competition, the number of paddlers within a boat is indicated by a figure besides the type of boat. K1 signifies an individual kayak race, K2 pairs, and K4 four-person crews. Kayak sprint has been in every Summer Olympics since it debuted at the 1936 Summer Olympics. Racing is governed by the International Canoe Federation. Slalom kayaks are flat-hulled, and, since the early 1970s, feature low-profile decks. They are highly maneuverable, and stable but not fast in a straight line. Inflatables, also known as the duckies or IKs, can usually be transported by hand using a carry bag. They are generally made of hypalon, a kind of neoprene, nitrile, nitrile rubberized fabric, PVC, or polyurethane-coated cloth. They can be inflated with foot, hand or electric pumps. Multiple compartments in all but the least expensive increase safety. They generally use low-pressure air, almost always below 0.2 bars. While many inflatables are non-rigid, essentially pointed rafts, best suited for use on rivers and calm water, the higher-end inflatables are designed to be hardy, seaworthy vessels. Recently, some manufacturers have added an internal frame, folding style, to a multi-section inflatable sit on top kayak to produce a seaworthy boat. Fully drop-stitch inflatable kayaks are also available, which are inflated to 8 to 10 psi. They are much stiffer, which enhances their paddling characteristics to vastly outperform traditional inflatable kayaks. The appeal of inflatable kayaks is their portability, their durability, they don't dent, ruggedness in white water, they bounce off rocks rather than break, and their easy storage. In addition, inflatable kayaks generally are stable, have a small turning radius and are easy to master, although some models take more effort to paddle and are slower than traditional kayaks. Because inflatable kayaks aren't as sturdy as traditional, hard-shelled kayaks, a lot of people tend to steer away from them. However, there have been considerable advancements in inflatable kayak technology over recent years. Folding kayaks are direct descendants of the skin-on-frame boats used by the Inuit and Greenlandic peoples. Modern folding kayaks are constructed from a wooden or aluminum frame over which is placed a synthetic skin made of polyester, cotton canvas, polyurethane, or hypalon. They are more expensive than inflatable kayaks, but have the advantage of greater stiffness and consequently better seaworthiness. A kayak with pedals allows the kayaker to propel the vessel with a rotating propeller or underwater flippers, rather than with a paddle. In contrast to paddling, kayakers who pedal kayaks use their legs rather than their arms. This allows for increased stamina and free hands while moving, making pedal kayaks popular among fishers. Traditional multi-hull vessels such as catamarans and outrigger canoes benefit from increased lateral stability without sacrificing speed, and these advantages have been successfully applied in twin-hull kayaks. Outrigger kayaks attach one or two smaller hulls to the main hull to enhance stability, especially for fishing, touring, kayak sailing and motorized kayaking. Twin-hull kayaks feature two long and narrow hulls, and since all their buoyancy is distributed as far as possible from their center line, they are more stable than mono-hull kayaks outfitted with outriggers. While native people of the Arctic regions hunted rather than fished from kayaks, in recent years kayak sport fishing has become popular in both fresh and salt water, especially in warmer regions. Traditional fishing kayaks are characterized by wide beams of up to 1.1 meters that increase their lateral stability. Some are equipped with outriggers that increase their stability, and others feature twin hulls enabling stand-up paddling and fishing. Compared with motorboats, fishing kayaks are inexpensive and have few maintenance costs. Many kayak anglers like to customize their kayaks for fishing, a process known as rigging.